good afternoon, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to the ACLU of Utah's Student Rights, Speech, Walkout, and Other Protests workshop, which will be presented by Staff Attorney Leah Farrell. We're joined by a group of students from several high schools. So we have Isabella Allen, Aurora Allen from Brighton High. We have Ermia Finian from the Arts High School. We have Wilhelmina Graff from West, and Zaya Woodruff from West High. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, hi everyone. I just want to say first off that this is an incredible moment to be a part of, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of the conversation. I'm just so inspired by what students like yourselves are doing right now. So what I'd like to do first off is just talk a little bit about sort of basic student rights. We're on Facebook Live right now, so a lot of other students, and probably parents, probably some administrators will be sort of watching to hear what these basic student rights are. And then also Ermia has sent me a list of questions that she heard as common questions, and so we'll sort of go through those and then also hear from her about the experience of organizing. And then kind of open it up for discussion, any other questions you have, and also, love to hear about your experience or tips that you have for students out there watching. So again, thank you. You're joining in the long history of students asserting rights and gaining rights that maybe adults haven't been able to. So first off, I want to say that, from me, this is not about, what I'm here to tell you is not about how to protest or whether you should protest, but to give information and tools about your rights, and so everyone can make informed decisions about how and whether they protest, and how and when they protest. So most of these most of the rights we'll be talking about are grounded in First Amendment rights, which apply to everyone, and students included. And it generally governs what the government can and can't do. So what we are talking about mostly applies to public schools, and private schools may have different rules. And so if you do go to a private school, I'd encourage you to speak to your administration. Let's see, another thing is that, also, today we are here together. You guys are organizers around anti-gun violence and against gun violence, but these First Amendment rights apply to all students and all viewpoints and all manner of speech. And that's what's great about it, is that it applies to everyone and protects all viewpoints. If you're watching on the live stream, feel free to write us questions. If we aren't able to get to them during the time we're here together, we'll definitely follow up with you. And you can also always reach out to Ermia at Walkouts at marchforourliveslc.com, and that's a good kind of organizing platform if you have questions for her or other students. So great. Okay. So the basic student rights around free speech. So schools do have the right to to regulate student conduct, or when they're either on campus or during school hours, right? So they can, tell students what to do. However, just by walking into school, you don't give up your rights. You don't give up your right to free speech or expression. So this was established by a Supreme Court case where a 13-year-old girl wanted to wore a black armband to school. She was disciplined by the school. She brought the case into the court and eventually went up to the Supreme Court, and it was found that discipline was unconstitutional. So that was in 1965. There's been a lot of lawsuits and other questions that have come up since, but it establishes this really strong, firm principle that you have the right to your political and free speech expression. So how do these two principles work together? Knowing that schools can control your behavior, but also knowing that you have your rights still. So kind of a basic rule is that you have the right to express yourself, including your political views. So that can be, armbands like we've seen, T-shirts, hairstyles, as long as it's not disruptive to the legitimate functions of the school, like for instance, the school's interest in creating a learning environment. This doesn't mean that schools always get it right. That's why there continues to be lawsuits, and where schools have said something is disruptive, and then the court has said, no, that's actually not disruptive. That's their political speech, and so. So if you feel like your school might have a policy that you think, or a practice of enforcing one of their policies that you feel like tramples on your constitutional rights, please get in touch with us. Turning our attention to discipline. Schools can, in Utah, like in most schools around the country, punish students for missing school. Generally, schools can take disciplinary measures, and in a context like a walkout or a protest, schools can take disciplinary measures that they would normally take for students missing school. However, they can't punish you more harshly just because it's a political expression. Utah has a law also around disrupting classrooms, and also disruptions that are in the area surrounding a school campus. So let's say like the sidewalk that's directly next to the windows of a school. If there's some sort of gathering there that they feel like is interrupting school, they can also ask people to move on. But they don't. Places like a public park that's just next to the school, but not right next, the noise from a protest wouldn't disrupt the school. That's public property and not under the school's sort of dominion. So the kind of a good rule of thumb here is that they can punish your actions, but they can't punish your thoughts. And so definitely what to watch out for in this coming weeks and afterwards, as if you feel like you have been punished or disciplined more severely, or simply because of what the context of your thoughts were, and not simply because of what your action is. Again, please contact us if you experience discipline or police or SRO action that you have concerns about. You can talk to us after the fact. Also, if you want to share your story about what it was like for you, and you can reach out to Mia or myself. So those are two of the things to keep in mind, and that are kind of our basic rights that students have are the right to free expression, and then the right to not be treated sort of differently simply because it's free expression. So with those kind of grounding principles down, I thought we could turn to Mia, and you could talk a little bit about the work you've been doing.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say I'm so proud of all my fellow organizers who are here, and all of the fellow students sitting at home, the teachers, the parents. I'm so glad you're joining us in this movement to expedite change, to really expedite gun reform for once. Currently, there are over 2,000 students, 2,000 schools who are registered on the National Registry, and that number continuously grows. Here in Utah, there's about 40 schools who are registered. I, as a student organizer for March for Our Lives Salt Lake City, have been working very closely with those students who have organized walkouts. And one thing that every student in the state and every student nationally has agreed upon is that no matter the repercussions, no matter what some may say, no matter the pernicious opinions that have been expressed towards us, we will continuously be dissentful. We will continuously try to push for gun reform and end to gun violence. And this is exactly what this movement is about. And one thing that's absolutely beautiful is that it's all youth-led. It's all youth-forefronted. I've had maybe a couple parents reach out to me to help them organize, but a majority has all been students saying, this is what I plan to do, and this is what I'm going to do. Can you help me organize? Which I think is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And so I am very glad that I am able to sit here with Leah today because there have been so many questions sent to me, asked to me, left in my email box, where students are concerned about how this is going to affect their schooling, how it's going to affect their college applications, how it's going to be portrayed in the media, what kind of backlash they're going to get from it when it comes to their schools, their administrators, and how exactly to open up this conversation with their administrators. Because this is very new to so many students, and they have yet to understand how that conversation can go. So we do have a set list of questions, and these are questions that so many of you have asked me. And so today we're going to be asking Leah these questions. So Leah, my first question for you is, what are the things we cannot speak about during the walkouts? Because many students have expressed that they do want to speak when they're walking out.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think there's a couple parts to that answer. One is kind of at what point in the walkout, right? So we've talked a little bit about sort of this idea that you can't disrupt school, or that itself sort of has other further consequences. So sort of saying things while you're in school or while you're leaving class might have further consequences of sort of discipline for that disruption. However, generally, once you're outside of class, or you're sort of being supported by your school, or you're in a public space, you have the same First Amendment rights as anyone, and you're able to express your opinion, express your criticism or critique of the government. The First Amendment does have limitations for everybody. For instance, it's if saying something to cause panic. There's the classic example of saying fire in a theater. That's limited. That can be controlled speech. But those, however, anything of things we've talked about, experiences you've had, political beliefs, critiques or asks of your government, things that you want to ask them, that's all things that you should be able to talk about while you're protesting.
Right. And so a lot of students have been confused about promotion of these walkouts because a lot of their schools have told them that they can't put up flyers. Mm-hmm. So are we allowed to promote these walkouts through flyers, social media, or local media?
Right. And also if you guys have any questions, feel free to jump in. But schools are, so looking at flyers, right? Schools are allowed to control kind of what flyers go up on their walls, sort of what announcements might go out over their intercoms, kind of controlling, because it might be seen as sort of the school sponsoring some sort of speech or idea, which can be problematic. However, what you say to each other, word of mouth, talking about the event, even within school, that's something that you're able to do, again, at the right time when it's not sort of disrupting class or, causing some sort of other disturbance for you to express your political beliefs while in school and campus is something you should generally be able to do. Promoting on social media, or sort of anything on social media that's outside of school time and not on school campus. So putting something on social media when outside of class time and when you're not on school grounds is also protected speech. It's sort of not something that the school should be able to control. There have been some cases, maybe not in this exact circumstance, but other circumstances where schools have tried to control what students put on social media, have said, sort of linked it to this disruption of class argument, or maybe not, just for whatever reason they've tried to overreach in there. And the court cases are a little bit mixed on this, but the ACLU has continued to support and represent students around their free speech rights on social media and against schools who try to reach into that domain. So that's, I would say that's sort of what you can do within some of the limits within school, and then some of the activity you can take part of outside of school.
Yeah. Now, is there a distinction between our legal restrictions and restrictions set in district policies?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, because it's a great almost civic lesson, but I'll try not to make it too boring, right? So schools and school districts are able and often required to set policies. Like, they might be told you have to set policies around discipline, and that's important because, right, like, now you as students can look at the policies and say this is what they're supposed to do. State statutes and state constitutions, along with the U.S. constitutions, are laws which those policies can't violate. So, the school, for example, is able to put forth a dress code policy. That's something they can do. However, the Constitution says that policy can't be done in a discriminatory manner. So they can't have a no hats policy that says no hats that support Trump, like that, or no ACLU of Utah hats, right? So they have to have policies that are neutral. And this is a good time to point out that if you haven't done so already, it's a good idea to look at your school's policies, look at their policy around missing class, having an unexcused absence, look at their policy around truancy, and look at their policies around expulsion or suspension, some of these more severe discipline policies, just so you know beforehand what your stance, where your school is, and what possibly the consequences might be for you if your school isn't supportive.
Now, a lot of students are concerned about college,
right,
and the reception of colleges when they see that students are demonstrating in protests. Mm-hmm. How exactly will their college applications be affected, if they would be affected, or will they be affected at all?
Right. So, the first kind of question to ask there is whether their school decides to take the step of disciplining them or not, or sort of creating something on their record that a college could see. I know the University of Utah and Westminster, as well as a number of schools around the colleges and universities around the country, have come out publicly and said that they won't take any discipline that results from these protests as a negative strike against students, so it wouldn't affect their college application. Other schools haven't come out with that policy, but I do think this sort of movement of these really prestigious schools and these schools within Utah and around the country to come out and say they won't take it as a negative mark really sends a message to school administrators that these schools don't think that an extreme discipline would be appropriate in this circumstance. So I do think it's something that school administrators and teachers should be paying attention to, but sort of how it may affect you down the line really kind of has a couple factors and a couple unknowns.
Right. Mm-hmm. Now, voting is axiomatically a vital part of our movement in pushing established legislation.
That's great.
And so are students allowed to set up voting booths in their school day of walkout?
Right. So again, we talked about, we talked about how the school has the right to sort of control what's happening on the campus. And, for a number of reasons, for safety reasons, for sort of not to be disruptive reasons, they can say which non-students can be on campus. So as far as setting up voting registration on school grounds, there might be, restrictions that the school has. However, being able to voting and voter registration is a very clearly protected First Amendment right. It's one of our strongest and most valued rights. And so definitely off of school grounds, registering 18-year-olds to vote is fine. Also, talking about it within school, sort of setting up and organizing in between classes or during lunch break and talking about it. Also, I think working with your school to, invite outside groups to do a voter registration might be a very positive kind of interaction with school administration, and I would hope would be something that they would be supportive. But definitely if, for instance, you have a protest that is taking you off school grounds, you can sort of register people during that event.
So it's more about having an open conversation with your administrators and seeing what they would allow.
Yeah, I think that is a really good opportunity to have that conversation, and I would, hope our schools would be supportive of students wanting to be engaged in the political process.
Right. Yeah. And so sign usage. Is sign usage permitted during walkouts?
Yes. So generally protests and demonstrations, signs are a big part of how people get their message across and are a big part of their First Amendment expression. Within the school, I can see how it may be disruptive, particularly in the class, to have a sign up, but taking that sign to wherever you're going and holding it out. Also, having it with you. If in other cases, students are allowed to have sort of a sign or have things with them. Again, you shouldn't be sort of picked on because they know that it's for a certain thing that they might have a problem with or a political disagreement about. So sort of having a sign with you shouldn't be a problem unless that's sort of otherwise restricted in the general course of your classes.
Yeah. And so there's been different conversations around how long students are going to be walking out for. Some will be walking out for simply 17 minutes to stand in solidarity with the Parkland students and administrators. Some want to say that they want to walk out all day or for an hour. Who has the final say in how long students can walk out for? Is it the students, the district, or the administrators?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's really up to you, to each, to the student organizers, what they want to organize, and then also each individual student, what they feel comfortable with doing, what they want to do, right? So, it sounds like there have been some conversations where schools have been supportive and there's some coordination. So I imagine hearing, feedback from administrations might be part of that decision. But yeah, that sort of decision about protest and about which rules to break and how to break them. I mean, that's what sort of civil disobedience and asserting, sort of taking this step is about. It's about you making that choice. I would say, it's important to be informed again about what your school's policies are. So, is it, do they have a policy that you can't return to school after missing part of a class? That might be something that they have and is a neutral policy, and might be one of the consequences of walking out. That might limit your choices a little bit. But yeah, again, looking at what your school's policies are around discipline for missing a class versus sort of missing a full day of school, if those are different, that would inform your choice or the choice of each student.
And as I mentioned earlier, there's been quite a few people who have expressed their dislike in our protests. So what are the proper procedures for handling counter-protesters if we do indeed encounter them?
Right. Yeah, so I think that, as you know, and probably we've seen, particularly this past year, that important issues often have people on who advocate for opposing views. And as I talked about in the beginning, those First Amendment protections protect viewpoints on different sides on the whole spectrum around an issue. Other counter-protesters or people with a different message have as much of a right to sort of express that message as you do and as I do. So if you do expect one thing I would say, maybe a little finesse on that statement, is that if you do expect a large counter-protest, or if you're sort of concerned about your safety, if you're holding a gathering or sort of walking to a public space, you might want to contact your local law enforcement authority, and it's sort of their job to make sure that First Amendment guarantee is given to everybody, so that one group isn't sort of blocking out the message of another group, and then also that's done safely. if you're gathering or organizing in your school, it's definitely, I think it's a great opportunity for schools to also show how that works, how the First Amendment works, and how both there's can be space for both messages, and how that can be done safely, that message expressed safely, and show a variety of viewpoints. Yeah.
Media coverage is also a vital part of this movement. Are students allowed to have media coverage of their walkouts?
Yeah, so students definitely have the ability to contact media, to talk to media, to express their own viewpoints to media. Again, schools can control which non-students come on to campus, and may do so to limit disruption. But certainly, media often covers events that issues around schools, and they also know their rights and are comfortable talking often to school administrators, so they might bring it up themselves. And then definitely in any public space, in a public park or sidewalk, yeah, they're free to be there and talk to you, and students can talk to them.
Right. So I think media coverage would also be a part of the conversation with our administrators.
Yeah, and knowing that knowing that the media is interested in this is something to talk to administrators about. Like, how can we show that our school is supportive of civic engagement? Might be something you talk to them about. Ultimately, if they don't think that that's going to be a good thing for their school environment, they might say no, but definitely worth having a conversation.
Now, I know you guys have questions, and you guys have been asking me a lot of questions throughout the weeks. What are some things that you want to ask Leah as you're here?
For my school, I go to West High School. So my main question was just about the media and how they can kind of can they be on the sidewalk? I know that you mentioned that schools still may have rights to ask people not to be in the area near schools.
Yeah.
But does the media, and my school administration has been very supportive, but just as a general question, kind of, does the media have the right to be on that sidewalk or in that area, like near the school, if the school says no to them being on the campus?
Yeah. Yes, and often, I've seen media sort of pull up on, park on the street, and then they'll have like a reporter on the sidewalk. So yes, and also that sort of state statute around sort of the area around school, it does require that the school administrator or someone says you can't be there. So it would be the kind of scenario where maybe press or other people would be gathered in that area and then told to leave, at which point they would have to leave. But there would be some sort of notice, and you would know.
So it would require like action from the administrators. They can't just initially.
Yeah, it wouldn't. They can't just say, okay, at all times, under all circumstances, no one can use this sidewalk because it's next to our school. And also just to keep in mind, public sidewalks are always public, always available for protest. Sometimes it's hard to tell what's a public sidewalk and what's like a sidewalk that goes through campus. It's actually property of the school. So that's something you'll also want to, or just generally good to pay attention to when thinking about protest rights. But they can't just say, all times this public sidewalk is off limits. They have to come out and say this is disrupting our school.
And another thing that I've talked to Leah about is if you are going to be protesting off of campus, it's always best to obtain a free speech permit, right?
Yeah, and I mean, particularly Salt Lake City has free speech permits that are allowed, and you have the ability to ask for one and expedited if it's a sort of short notice thing. Again, it's not required. Permits aren't required to assemble and express your message in public spaces. But when you have a city that wants to be helpful, and like I said before, if you maybe want to be in touch with law enforcement, if you think there may be sort of counter protests, that's a good way to just give them a heads up about how many people you expect or what have you. and not all cities have that same, so you'd have to look at, if you're outside of Salt Lake, you'd have to look at what may be available in your city. But I don't think there's any harm in necessarily trying to coordinate and make sure that it goes smoothly when you expect a large amount of people in any public space. Yeah.
Another question I've heard a lot is a lot of teachers and students have been asking me whether teachers are allowed to participate in the protests, and if that's like a decision that the administration makes, or if that's a decision that they just have the right to do it no matter what.
Right. Yeah. So we have, if you have teachers asking you questions, if we have information on our website a little bit more about. We'll have information about teachers' rights. They're not the same as students' rights, because they're there to make sure class happens and to carry on that learning environment, right? So they don't have necessarily the same. Well, or also you could look at it this way, right? There's repercussions if a teacher were to walk out of class for some other reason, right? So likely those same repercussions could be, happen to them, which are more serious than sort of being disciplined for missing a day of class. They might involve their ability to, stay there as a teacher. So yeah, it's a little bit different. I know some school, again, I think having that conversation with the administration and finding out what their policy around it is probably the best step for the teachers to take.
I have a question that came online that dovetails into the teachers, and it's what about larger staff? So like librarians or other school staff is a question that they're asking. That'd be similar to teachers.
Yeah, again, I think anyone, so students, their participation in school looks different than someone whose job it is to be in school. And so just like any other sort of civil disobedience or decision to break a rule, the consequences are, you in turn kind of accept what those consequences are. Generally, consequences for any action shouldn't be worse because it's a act of political expression. But yeah, again, they would, any staff, teachers and any other staff at the school would have to know what, it would be best for them to find out what would happen to them generally for taking that same action. And then they might want to speak with their administrators to find out what their particular policy or stance is around this, these actions happening in the coming weeks. Yeah. Okay. Do you have any other questions, the group here? We have some online questions coming in, which is great. But
one question.
Yeah.
We've ran into a couple groups of kids who are likely to counter-protest.
Okay.
How would you suggest we interact with them and have conversations civilly?
Yeah, I know. That's so. Yeah, I can. There's. It might not be my complete expertise to talk about sort of. Not peaceful engagement, but I can definitely say that how has it been so far to talk to them?
It's been okay for the most part.
Yeah.
Well, I think one part of that conversation is allowing them to know that their First Amendment right is there, right? It is constitutional for them to speak up as well. However, it's not going to stop your movement, and it's not going to stop your message that you're trying to portray.
Right.
So I think that's one thing to allow them to know, is that no matter how much they want to counter your protest, it's no use because you're still going to be pushing the message.
Yeah, I think why one of the things that the First Amendment does is exactly gives people space to both both voice their opinions. The extent that you want to engage them or not is still up to you, right? You're not required to sort of engage them and sort of have that debate if you don't want or you don't find that it's useful. But yeah, I do think it's a good opportunity to sort of to talk to each other in a civil way and hear each other's viewpoints. But for something like a protest where it's organized, oftentimes there's a strategic decision to sort of ignore the other side, to say that that's not what this moment is about. This moment is about celebrating our power within our message. They can do that for theirs, but this isn't about creating a debate right now because that's not what we want to do in this moment.
So I have a question as well. If our group protesting and pushing for gun violence reform were to be punished more harshly than it would be if we were just skipping class, because at our school that just constitutes like a missed class, and you have to do, it's similar to detention. You just have to stay after class to make it up. But if that was if they decided to give us a more harsh punishment, how would we go about combating that? Would we just talk to the administration? Would we need to, like...
Well, definitely let us know, and we could let the ACLU know, and we'd like to support you and what you do going forward. But also, just for you, if it's a much more severe penalty, if it's much more severe discipline, for instance, if they're like prolonged expulsions require that a formal hearing happens, and you can have a lawyer there with you. So that's sort of what is guaranteed. If it's something less, I would definitely say, talk to the administration and sort of go through whatever steps are available, and with your parent, if your parent's supportive, to challenge that discipline, talking and showing them that it's different than what they would have given someone else who did the same thing. And then, it may be illegal what they've done. So that's something to sort of confront, and particularly confront after trying to resolve it within the school.
Okay, so then just to build on that a little bit, I think that it is a likely outcome at our school, especially for the protesters of gun violence, to possibly have a harsher punishment than those who counter-protest us. And our school does not have a very good history of handling discrimination very well.
Right.
So if that were to happen, in that case, how would we, like, would we just go about it the same way, or like, is there more we can do?
I mean, I think that would be, definitely sort of document and get and talk to other people who are organize again, I guess, is a good answer to that. Like, organize again around who has been disciplined, and be able to collect the stories or collect the examples of who was disciplined less. I mean, in that circumstance, you have two groups of students or two individual students doing basically the exact same thing. Schools, they do have some discretion around, they may try to argue that, this looks totally different than someone missing a regular day of school, right? And so this is more disruptive. So they may say something like that. I think that there's definitely room to push back, even if they take that line. But particularly if there's, two groups on the same day doing the same thing, that would be definitely worth, engaging the school and pushing back on.
Okay. So there was a similar question online, and it was if students feel that they're being retaliated, specifically for having walked out, maybe a specific teacher being harsh. They just kind of wanted to know tips on how to document this, if they should be documenting it, or if they just immediately contact the ACLU. So just kind of what the steps are.
Good tips around documenting anything is to gather the policies in your school that you think that are sort of being unfairly enforced or enforced differently against you than someone else. Write down your experience. Try to do that as soon as you're sort of able. Sort of you have an encounter with a administrator, if you have an encounter with a teacher, always be sort of respectful. Oftentimes civil rights are something where you have to take care of yourself in that moment, knowing what your rights are, and then come back afterwards and assert them. So while being polite and in that conversation afterwards, document it, write down what they said, what you said, while it's fresh in your memory. And then also, find other students who might have had similar experiences or might have had really different experiences. So you can also try to document what, others' experiences as well as your own.
And then also, just kind of to go along with that question, I know that a lot of students have been worried about individual teachers. Yeah. So for my school in particular, our administration, like I said before, has been very supportive in a They're not facilitating, they're not involved, but
Yeah.
they have been supportive of us sharing our voices and our opinions. But I know that there are certain teachers within the school that do not want to take the same approach. And so is it, if the administration makes kind of a blanket statement of, we are not going to have any harsh punishments, we're not going to, retaliate against these students, is it, what can we do, or is it kind of, are these teachers allowed to have their classes and like assignments kind of reflect retaliation against students?
Oh, okay. So, because I was wondering, what is this teacher? What is this mean-spirited teacher going to do? So, because the school, your principal and the vice principals, they sort of are in charge of discipline, right? So, if they are supportive, right, then the individual teacher might complain, but they'll sort of not be able to control it. If you do think that they've sort of done a pop quiz in that moment just to sort of punish the students who walked out, I would definitely bring that up with the administration and say, we think this was targeted. Again, with that you shouldn't be treated more harshly. I think that falls into that same camp and would be definitely something to bring up with the administration, and then hopefully they can negotiate with the teachers instead of the student having to sort of have that confrontation with the teacher. Yeah.
I have a few others. Somebody's concerned about can a teacher actually physically prevent students from leaving the classroom? And they're just wondering, can a teacher lock the door and not permit students to leave? Is that allowed? And if it happens, what can students do, if anything at all?
Yeah, so I can't think of a scenario where that would be okay or permitted. Schools and therefore teachers can step in to protect the safety of students in circumstances, but just to prevent them from leaving for sort of no other reason than they don't agree with the speech that student is expressing. That I think that would be highly problematic, and definitely again do what you feel comfortable with in that moment. If that means just obeying what that teacher has been saying, that's probably what I would do in that circumstance. And then after the fact, definitely talk to your school about it, talk to your parents about it, and reach out to us.
Do you think it would be smart in that situation, just because I know that, not social media, but a lot of us have phones and little video recorders. Do you think that it would be helpful to maybe take a video of that happening so that there's actual evidence that was happening and going on, and then that can then be used to?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen cases where video of what's happening in classes has been incredibly helpful to shed light on injustices and really scary behavior. What your school's policy is around sort of bringing out your phone and using your phone. I mean, but I think where something really terrible was happening and you brought out your phone, but it would be hard to see a school that would think it was reasonable to say not bring out your phone was a bad idea. Right. But I mean, we've definitely seen the power of that in many circumstances.
So that scenario would surpass the no phone rule.
Well, it doesn't it wouldn't have to, but I would hope that schools would be reasonable and would understand what had happened in that moment. Yeah.
One more question. Somebody wants to know, should the students take their supplies with them, like their backpacks and books when they walk out? Do they leave them in the classroom, put them in a locker? What do they do?
Yeah, maybe.
On the length of how long you're leaving the classroom.
Yeah, do you guys have any thoughts about that?
I mean, I would say to always take your supplies with you, because there's always a risk of somebody stealing it. And especially if there's probably somebody who's on the opposing side of this argument in the classroom with your supplies left alone, then I think it could be tricky. So I advise you to always take your supplies with you or to lock them in a locker.
That being said, I think you should read your teacher if you know your teacher is supportive of you and like will likely be in the room while you're gone, I think that'd be a fair choice to leave your things in the classroom.
Yeah, I know at our school we're only doing a 17-minute walkout, so I don't think that it would be necessary to take your things out of the class with you and carry all that with you, unless you feel like your belongings are at risk of being taken or vandalized and such.
Great. All right. Well, those are some great questions. Again, really thank you so much for having me be part of the conversation, and great to be here to support you and everyone watching. Yeah, definitely get in touch with us. You can get in touch with Ermia at Walkouts at marchforourliveslc.com. And yeah, please write to us if you have any problems in the coming week.
Well, thank you, Leah, for joining this conversation with us. And if you want any more information on walkouts or where exactly to contact me, please go to marchforourlivesaltlakecity.com.